The lawyer's office was the color of bone, not the clean, bleached white of a skeleton in a museum, but the yellowed, forgotten ivory of something left in a drawer for too long. Ilara sat on a leather chair that was cracked like dried river mud. It sighed under her weight, a sound of tired resignation she felt deep in her own chest. Across the vast mahogany desk, her Uncle Marcus cleared his throat. He was a man built of soft angles and expensive fabrics, his face a fleshy mask of practiced sympathy. The sympathy did not reach his eyes. They were small and hard, like chips of granite. "It's all quite straightforward, Ilara," he said, his voice smooth and oiled. He gestured to the stack of papers in front of his own lawyer, a man who looked as if he had been carved from the same pale wood as the office walls. "Your father, bless his soul, was not a financially prudent man." Ilara said nothing. She focused on a spot on the wall where the paint had bubbled, a tiny imperfection in the sterile room. Her father, Thomas, had been many things. A man who could fix any engine by sound alone. A man whose hands, though calloused and grease-stained, could coax a splinter from her finger with impossible gentleness. A man who smelled of sawdust and WD-40. Prudent was not a word she would have used. Honest, yes. Kind, always. But not prudent. After settling his considerable debts, Marcus continued, a delicate wince accompanying the word, the estate is insolvent. Insolvent. The word hung in the air-conditioned chill. It meant the house she grew up in, the one with the porch swing her father had built from a single piece of oak, was gone. It meant his old truck, the one she learned to drive in, its clutch sticky and its radio perpetually stuck on a classic rock station, was gone. It meant the small savings account he had meticulously fed with crumpled bills from his wallet was gone. It meant she, at 20 years old, was gone too, erased from the life she knew. Her cousin Liam, Marcus's son, shifted uncomfortably in the chair beside his father. He was a shadow of Marcus, younger and less defined, his expensive suit hanging on him like a costume. He wouldn't meet her eyes. He was staring at his own polished shoes as if they held the secrets of the universe. "There is one small matter," Marcus said, pulling a single, tarnished brass key from his waistcoat pocket. It was old, the kind of key that belonged to a heavy, forgotten door. He slid it across the polished surface of the desk. It stopped a few inches from her hands. "Your father owned a property, out in Havenwood, some derelict commercial building, a laundromat, I believe." He chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. "The appraisal value is essentially zero. Less than zero, actually, when you factor in the property taxes he was behind on. But the deed is in his name. Legally, it's yours." Ilara looked at the key. It was familiar. She remembered it from her father's workbench, hanging on a nail next to a collection of strange, specific wrenches. He'd never said what it was for. "We've settled the back taxes as a gesture of goodwill," Marcus said, his generosity as thin as a coat of varnish. "But the transfer of the deed has a nominal fee, $12 for the paperwork." He smiled. "Consider it a final piece of business, a way to close the books on your father's eccentricities." It wasn't a gesture of goodwill. It was a final, calculated cruelty, a way to make her pay for the privilege of being left with nothing, to take the last of her cash and hand her a piece of junk in return, all under the sterile, legal gaze of his bone-colored lawyer. Liam finally looked up, a flicker of something, shame maybe, in his eyes. It was gone as quickly as it appeared. He was his father's son. Ilara reached out. Her fingers, slender and clean, a stark contrast to the memory of her father's, closed around the key. The metal was cold. She pulled her worn wallet from her pocket. Inside was a collection of receipts, a faded picture of her and her dad at a county fair, and a single $20 bill. The last of her money in the world. She pulled it out, the paper soft and tired. She placed it on the desk. "I'll need my change," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it didn't tremble. It was the first thing she had said in an hour. Marcus's smile tightened. He pulled a 10, a 1 and 4/4 from his own wallet, and pushed them toward her with a flick of his finger. The transaction was complete. She scooped up the change and the key. She stood. The cracked leather chair gave another weary sigh. She walked out of the office without looking back. She didn't see Liam flinch as the door clicked shut. She didn't see Marcus lean back, a portrait of smug satisfaction. She just felt the cold, hard shape of the key in her palm. Homeless at 20. Owner of a worthless, shuttered laundromat. For $12. The journey was a slow erasure. The city, with its sharp angles and hurried crowds, bled away into sprawling suburbs, which in turn softened into rolling farmland. The bus wheezed and rattled, a tired beast hauling a cargo of quiet lives. Alara sat by the window, her single duffel bag at her feet, and watched the world she knew disappear. Her phone had died 2 hours ago. The charger was in a box of things Marcus had deemed personal effects, a box she would never see again. It felt right, in a way. A clean break, a severing. Havenwood didn't appear so much as it congealed out of the afternoon haze. It wasn't a town you arrived at. It was a place you found yourself in when the road ran out of other options. The bus hissed to a stop in front of a gas station with a single, bleary-eyed pump. "Havenwood," the driver grunted, not turning around. Alara was the only one to get off. She stood on the cracked pavement, the bus pulling away in a cloud of diesel smoke, leaving a profound silence in its wake. The air smelled different here. It was thick with the scent of damp earth, cut grass, and something else, something metallic and vaguely sad, like old rain on rust. She asked the man inside the gas station, a teenager with bored eyes, for directions to Elm Street. He pointed a thumb down the main road. "Keep walking till you think you've gone too far. It's on the left." The main street was a collection of tired brick buildings, a diner with a flickering neon sign that read, "Martha's," a hardware store with a hand-painted sign, a boarded-up movie theater. It was a town holding its breath, waiting for an exhale that might never come. She walked. Her duffel bag grew heavier with each step. The sun beat down. The silence was broken only by the buzz of insects and the distant caw of a crow. She walked until she thought she had gone too far. And there it was, on the left. It wasn't just derelict. It was a wound on the face of the street. The sign, hanging from one rusty chain, read, "The Soap and Spin." The letters faded to ghosts. The large plate glass windows were covered in plywood, scrawled with faded graffiti. Weeds, thick as a man's thumb, grew in a riot from the cracks in the sidewalk, climbing the brick facade like desperate green fingers. Despair was a physical thing. It settled in her stomach, a cold, heavy stone. Marcus was right. This wasn't an asset. It was a tombstone, a monument to her father's failure. Her inheritance was a ruin. She stood there for a long time, just looking. A stray cat, a flash of ginger fur, darted from behind a heap of trash bags and disappeared down an alley. The world felt empty. She was entirely, utterly alone. Finally, she moved. She pushed through the grasping weeds, her shoes sinking into the soft dirt. The plywood over the door was held in place by a newer-looking padlock, but next to it was the original door, solid wood beneath the peeling paint, with a tarnished brass keyhole. Her keyhole. She slid the key in. It felt gritty, resistant. She had to jiggle it, her frustration mounting with each failed attempt. She imagined her father's hands, patient and sure, and tried to mimic the memory. A slight pressure upward, a turn to the left. A loud, grating click echoed in the quiet street. The lock had turned. She put her shoulder to the door and pushed. It groaned, scraping against the floor, and opened just enough for her to slip through. She stepped inside, into the gloom. The air was thick and stale, a potent cocktail of dust, mildew and the faint, chemical ghost of long-gone detergent. Sunlight struggled through the cracks in the boarded-up windows, cutting dusty golden shafts through the darkness. Her first impression was of a machine graveyard. A dozen washing machines stood in a line against one wall, their white enamel grimy and stained. Across from them, a row of massive, double-stacked dryers stared back with round, glassy eyes. A plastic folding table sat askew in the middle of the room, one leg collapsed. It was as bad as she had imagined. Worse. She let the duffel bag slide from her shoulder. It hit the concrete floor with a soft thud. The sound was small in the cavernous space. This was it. This was her home now. A dusty, forgotten box filled with dead machines. She took a few steps forward, her shoes crunching on debris. She ran a hand along the top of the nearest washer. It left a clean streak in the thick layer of dust. But then she stopped. She looked down. The floor wasn't just concrete. It was poured concrete, perfectly level, with no cracks or seams she could see. It was smooth, almost polished under the grime. A floor built to withstand the vibration of a dozen heavy machines running at once, for decades. She looked up. The ceiling was high and crisscrossed with heavy-duty steel beams. The electrical conduits weren't just strung haphazardly. They were run in neat, parallel lines, bent at perfect 90-degree angles. The plumbing, visible along the back wall, was copper. Thick copper pipes, neatly soldered and strapped to the brick. This wasn't the work of a careless man. This wasn't a slapdash job. This was the work of a craftsman. She walked the length of the room, her eyes tracing the lines of pipe and conduit. She ran her hand along the cool brick of the back wall. The mortar was clean and even. Everything was solid. The bones of the place were good. They were perfect. Beneath the decay, beneath the neglect and the grime, there was care. There was intention. There was her father. A flicker of something small and warm ignited in the cold stone of her stomach. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was something more fragile. It was curiosity. The hunger was a dull ache that had settled behind her ribs. The last thing she'd eaten was a stale granola bar on the bus, hours ago. Her $8.04 felt impossibly small. The flickering neon sign of the diner next door seemed to be calling her. Martha's. It promised warmth, if nothing else. She pushed the heavy laundromat door until it was mostly closed, the scraping sound loud in the evening quiet. The air outside was cooler now. The streetlights had begun to hum on, casting pools of lonely yellow light on the empty sidewalk. The bell above the diner door chimed a cheerful, incongruous sound. The inside was a time capsule. Red vinyl booths, a long formica countertop, the smell of coffee and frying onions. It was warm and bright and alive. An older woman with a cloud of white hair pinned up in a flour-dusted apron stood behind the counter, wiping it down with a cloth. She looked up as Alara entered, her eyes a startlingly bright blue. "Well, hello there, honey. Haven't seen you around here before," she said, her voice warm and raspy, like worn-out denim. Alara slid onto a stool at the counter. It swiveled with a soft squeak. "Just got into town." "Passing through?" "Something like that." Alara looked at the menu on the wall. A grilled cheese was $4. Coffee was $1. She could afford that. She could afford to be warm for a little while. "I'll have a grilled cheese and a coffee, please." The woman smiled, revealing a network of fine lines around her eyes. "Coming right up. I'm Martha." "Alara." Martha turned to the grill, moving with an economy of motion that spoke of long practice. She laid 2 slices of thick bread on the flat top, the sizzle a comforting sound. "So what brings you to Havenwood, Alara? Not exactly a tourist destination." Alara hesitated. She laid the brass key on the counter, next to the salt shaker. It looked out of place on the clean formica. Martha's movement stopped. She turned from the grill, her eyes fixed on the key. She wiped her hands on her apron and picked it up, her fingers gentle. "I'll be," she whispered. She looked at Alara, her gaze sharp and appraising. She saw the worn-out clothes, the exhaustion in her eyes, the single duffel bag by the door. She saw the resemblance, the shape of the jaw, the set of the eyes. "You're Thomas's girl." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Alara felt a lump form in her throat. To be recognized, to be connected to him by a stranger. It was more than anyone in her own family had offered her. She could only nod. Martha placed the key back on the counter. Her expression had softened. The professional friendliness was gone, replaced by something deeper, something akin to sorrow. "I heard he passed," she said quietly. "I'm so sorry, honey. Your daddy was a good man, a quiet man, but a good one." The grilled cheese on the flat top began to smoke. Martha turned quickly, her focus back on her work. She flipped the sandwich, slid it onto a plate, and placed it in front of Alara. It was golden brown, oozing with melted cheese. Next to it, she placed a bowl of thick tomato soup and a tall glass of milk. "I didn't order," Alara started. "On the house," Martha said, her tone leaving no room for argument. She filled a heavy ceramic mug with coffee and pushed it toward her. "Your daddy, he fixed my walk-in freezer last winter, in the middle of a snowstorm. Wouldn't take a dime. Said a neighbor's a neighbor. You eat." Alara ate. The soup was hot and rich. The sandwich was the best thing she had ever tasted. The food was more than sustenance. It was kindness. It was a tether to a world she thought she had lost completely. "He bought that place about 5 years ago," Martha said, leaning against the counter as Alara ate. "The bank was auctioning it off. Everyone thought he was crazy. But he saw something in it. He'd come in here, grab a coffee, and just work. All day. Stripped it down to the bricks. Put in that new floor, all the plumbing, the electric. Said he was building it to last." Martha shook her head, a sad smile on her face. "His brother came sniffing around once. The one from the city. A real piece of work, that one. Looked at the place like it was a pile of garbage. Thomas told him to get lost. Said it wasn't for him. Not for him." Alara looked down at the key on the counter. "He never opened it," Martha continued. "Said it wasn't ready yet. Said he was waiting for the right time, or the right person." Her bright blue eyes met Alara's. The right person. The meal was a truce with despair. The warmth of the diner, the solidity of the food, Martha's stories. They built a small fortification inside her. When she finally left, the night was fully dark, the moon a sliver of silver in the ink-black sky. "You need anything, you come see me," Martha called after her. "Anything at all." Back inside the laundromat, the darkness felt different. It was no longer a void, but a space filled with unanswered questions. Energized by the food and the conversation, Alara found a heavy-duty flashlight in a side pocket of her duffel bag. Her father had insisted she keep one. "You never know when you'll need to see in the dark," he'd said. The beam cut a sharp, clean circle through the gloom. She started a more methodical search. She walked the perimeter again, shining the light on the details her father had built, the solid walls, the tidy infrastructure. This was his language. This was his love, expressed in copper and concrete. She moved through the rows of machines. They were old, commercial-grade Speed Queens, built like tanks. Each one was coated in the same thick dust. She ran her hand over them, one by one. They were silent, waiting. Then she got to the last one. It was at the very end of the line, tucked into a corner. It was different from the others. It was an older model maybe, or just more beaten up. The enamel was chipped, and a dark stain, like rust or old oil, ran down its front from the coin slot. It looked deader than all the rest. She tried to push it. The others had shifted slightly under her weight, but this one was completely solid. It didn't budge. It was as if it were anchored to the floor, or to the wall. She knelt, shining the flashlight behind it. The space was tight, filled with cobwebs that looked as thick as cotton. The machine was almost flush against the brick wall. Almost. There was a small 2-inch gap. In that gap, she saw it. Not a pipe, not a conduit. A line. A faint, straight line in the brickwork that didn't match the mortar pattern. Her heart started to beat a little faster. She squeezed into the gap, her shoulder pressing against the cold metal of the washer. The air was thick with the smell of spiders and decay. She ran her fingers along the line. It was a seam, a perfectly cut seam around a rectangular section of the wall, about 2 feet wide and 3 feet high. There was no handle, no knob. She pushed on it. Nothing. She ran her fingers over the bricks, feeling for a loose one, a trigger, a hidden switch. This was something from a storybook, not a laundromat in a forgotten town. She remembered her father's advice about stubborn things. Don't force it. Understand it. She shone the light on the machine again. The dark stain. It wasn't random. It came from the coin slot. She peered into the slot. It was jammed. Something was stuck in there. Using the edge of her brass key, she pried at it. With a soft click, a small, flat piece of metal fell out into her palm. It wasn't a coin. It was a tool, a custom-made piece of steel, shaped like a key but with a strange, flat head. She looked from the tool to the wall. Along the seam, almost invisible, was a tiny hole, no bigger than the head of a nail. It was at the exact height of the coin slot. With a trembling hand, she inserted the strange key into the hole. It slid in perfectly. She turned it. There was a deep, satisfying thud from within the wall, a mechanism releasing. She pushed on the rectangular section of brick. It swung inward silently, on well-oiled hinges, revealing a dark, cavernous space. She pointed her flashlight into the opening. It was a small, brick-lined chamber. On a built-in wooden shelf sat a gray metal toolbox. It was old but pristine, not a speck of rust on it. Below it, stacked neatly, were 3 thick, leather-bound notebooks. This was the secret. This was what was behind the last machine. She reached in and lifted out the top notebook. The leather was supple, the kind of quality that lasts forever. There was no title. She opened it to the first page. The handwriting was her father's, his familiar, blocky script, slanted slightly to the right. For Alara. If you're reading this, it means a few things. It means I'm gone. It means Marcus was as predictable as a stripped gear. And it means you were smart enough to find this. I'm sorry I had to leave you a mess. But a thing isn't ruined just because it's dirty. Remember that. This place is yours. Not the mess you see, but the place it's meant to be. These notebooks will show you how. The tools will help. The rest is up to you. The work is the way. Love, Dad. Alara sank to the floor, the open notebook in her lap, the beam of the flashlight illuminating the words. The dusty air of the laundromat seemed to shimmer. Tears she hadn't been able to shed in the lawyer's office, on the bus, or even looking at the ruin, now fell freely. They dripped onto the page, smudging the ink of her father's last words to her. He hadn't abandoned her to a pile of junk. He had left her a map. The first night was spent on a pile of dusty drop cloths in a corner, her duffel bag for a pillow. Sleep was fitful, punctuated by the strange groans of the old building settling and the scuttling of unseen things. But for the first time in days, she didn't feel hopeless. She felt potential, a fragile, terrifying potential. Morning came not with an alarm clock, but with the sun forcing its way through the grimy cracks in the plywood. It striped the floor with bars of light, illuminating a galaxy of floating dust motes. She sat up, her back stiff. The first order of business was survival, water, power, a place to wash her face. She opened the first notebook again. The first section was titled, The Bones. Page 1. Water. Main shutoff is in the back utility closet. Green handle. It's a quarter-turn ball valve. Should be smooth. I replaced it last year. The pipes are sound, but you'll want to run the slop sink tap for 10 minutes to clear them out. Might be some rust in the line." She found the utility closet at the back, just as the diagram in the notebook showed. The door was stuck fast. She had to put her shoulder into it, the wood groaning in protest. Inside, it was dark and smelled of damp concrete. Her flashlight beam found it immediately, a pristine copper pipe with a bright green handle. She turned it. It moved with a smooth, silent motion. A deep thrum echoed through the building as the pipes pressurized for the first time in years. A gurgling sound, like a giant waking up. She went to the slop sink in the corner, a huge, stained porcelain basin. The faucet handles were heavy industrial chrome. She turned the cold tap. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a shudder, a cough, and a violent spurt of rusty brown water blasted into the sink. It smelled like wet metal. She let it run, just as he'd said. She watched as it slowly, miraculously, began to clear, from brown to murky yellow, then to cloudy white, and finally to crystal clear. She cupped her hands and splashed the icy water on her face. It was the most luxurious feeling in the world. Progress. Small, but real. Next, power. Page 2. Electric. The main breaker panel is next to the closet. It's a 200-amp service, commercial grade. More than you'll ever need. I've flipped all the individual breakers to off. Start with the main, then flip them one by one. Number 1 is lights. Number 2 is the outlets on the east wall. The machines are all on their own circuits. Don't touch those yet. One thing at a time. The breaker panel was a large, gray metal box. She swung the heavy door open. Inside was a forest of black switches, all in the off position, each one neatly labeled in her father's block print. Lights. East outlets. Washer 1. Dryer 3 to 4. She took a deep breath. This felt more dangerous than water. She gripped the large main breaker at the top. It was stiff. She used both hands and threw it into the on position, with a loud, authoritative clunk. The building hummed. A low, electric thrum vibrated through the concrete floor. She flipped breaker number 1. Overhead, a row of long, fluorescent fixtures flickered, buzzed, and then blinked into a pale, humming light. The room was flooded with a flat, institutional glare. The dust, the grime, the scale of the task ahead was laid bare. It was overwhelming. But there was light. She plugged her phone charger into an outlet on the east wall and connected her dead phone. The screen lit up. Another small victory. The rest of the day was spent on the most basic, most grueling task: cleaning. The notebook said nothing about cleaning. That was on her. Martha, true to her word, appeared in the late morning, pushing the front door open. She carried a paper bag that smelled of bacon and coffee. "Thought you might need this," she said, setting it on the one clean spot Alara had managed to wipe down on the folding table. "My God, Thomas, you really did a number on this place." She wasn't looking at the dirt. She was looking at the conduits, the plumbing, the solid floor. "He built it to last," Alara said, echoing Martha's own words back to her. Martha nodded, her eyes misty. "That he did." She looked at the grimy machines. "You got a long road ahead of you, honey." "I've got a map," Alara said, tapping the notebook that lay open on the table. Martha brought more than breakfast. Later that day, she returned with a bucket, a mop, a broom, and a collection of industrial-strength cleaning supplies. "Found these in my back room. No use to me." So Alara worked. She swept up years of dirt and debris. She scrubbed the concrete floor on her hands and knees, the chemical smell of the cleaner sharp in her nostrils. The water in the bucket turned black again and again. She scraped peeling paint from the walls. It was mindless, exhausting, punishing work. Her muscles screamed. Her hands were raw. But with every square foot of clean floor, with every patch of scrubbed wall, The place felt a little more hers. She wasn't just cleaning a building. She was claiming it. She was scouring away the neglect, the failure, the insult from her uncle. She was revealing the good bones her father had left for her. By evening, she had cleared and cleaned a 20 by 20 foot section of the room. The concrete, now clean, was a smooth, pale gray. The air was still dusty, but it smelled of bleach and lemon cleaner instead of just decay. She sat on the edge of the clean section, her body aching, and ate the cold sandwich Martha had left for her. She looked at the row of silent, filthy machines. They were no longer a graveyard. They were a challenge. She opened the notebook to the next section. The machines, washers. Page 12. The Speed Queen top loaders, Model 711. Simple beasts, reliable. If they don't turn on, 90% of the time it's a bad lid switch. People slam the lids. Easy fix. Part number is 34-B. The belts are the second thing to go. You'll hear a squeal before they snap. I left a box of new belts in the toolbox. The toolbox. She'd almost forgotten. She retrieved it from the hidden chamber. It was heavy. She set it down and opened the clasps. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, was a complete set of her father's tools. Not just any tools. They were vintage Craftsman and Snap-on, polished and gleaming, wrenches and ratchets, screwdrivers and pliers. They felt balanced in her hand, solid and real. This was a craftsman's kit, curated over a lifetime. It felt like shaking his hand. At the bottom, under a tray of sockets, was a small cardboard box. On it, in his handwriting, lid switches, 6. And another larger box, washer belts, 12. He hadn't just left her a map. He had left her provisions. The next day, she picked a machine. Washer number 3. It looked no better or worse than the others. She plugged it in and flipped its corresponding breaker. Nothing. No lights, no sound. She consulted the notebook. The diagrams were clear, hand-drawn with a ruler and a steady hand. How to access the lid switch. She followed the instructions, using a putty knife to release the clips on the control panel, just as he described. The panel lifted up, revealing the guts of the machine. Wires, a timer, a pressure sensor, and a small plastic switch with a lever positioned to be depressed when the lid was closed. She used a multimeter from the toolbox, another surprise, a high-end Fluke model, to test the switch. The notebook even had a page on how to use it. The switch was dead, no continuity, just as he'd predicted. Replacing it was trickier. The space was tight, the screws were small. Her fingers felt clumsy. She dropped a screw and had to fish it out with a magnetic retriever from the toolbox. She scraped her knuckles. She swore under her breath. But she did it. She closed everything back up, her heart pounding a little. This was the real test. She took a breath. She closed the lid, and she pressed the start button. There was a click, a hum, and then, with a lurch, the agitator began to turn. Swish-thump, swish-thump. The sound of a working washing machine. Alara laughed. A real, loud, uninhibited laugh that echoed in the big, empty room. It was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. She had fixed it. She, Alara, had taken this broken, dead thing, and she had brought it back to life. She leaned against the vibrating machine, her hand flat on its side, feeling the rhythm of it. It wasn't just a machine. It was a promise that things could be mended, that a thing isn't ruined just because it's broken. The work was the way. It was in that moment, with the hum of the first resurrected machine filling the space, that a strange thought occurred to her, a thought that felt both like her own and like a voice from outside. It was a feeling of a story turning a page, of a chapter ending and a new one beginning, so full of possibility that it needed to be announced. If you've made it this far into Alara's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. The thought was so clear, so distinct, it made her stand up straight. Subscribe to what? Tell who? It made no sense, yet it felt profoundly true. The journey so far was just the prologue. The real story was about to begin. One machine was a victory. A dozen was a job. The next 2 weeks fell into a rhythm. Wake up with the sun. Coffee and a pastry from Martha, who now left them on the front step every morning. Then, work. She moved down the line of top loaders, a one-woman assembly line of resurrection. Each machine was a puzzle. Washer number 4 had a good lid switch but a leaky water valve. The notebook showed her how to replace the gasket. She found a small box of assorted gaskets in the toolbox. Washer number 5 had a bad belt. She learned to tip the heavy machine on its back, the muscles in her arms and back complaining, to access the motor underneath. The first time, it took her an hour to wrestle the new belt on. By the third time, on washer number 8, she could do it in 15 minutes. Her hands changed. The skin grew tougher. Her nails were permanently rimmed with grease. She had a collection of new cuts and scrapes, but they felt like badges of honor. Her body changed too. The softness of her former life was burning away, replaced by a lean, wiry strength. With each fixed machine, her confidence grew. She learned the language of them, the subtle difference in the hum of a healthy motor versus one with a worn bearing, the sharp click of a properly functioning timer. One afternoon, while wrestling with a particularly stubborn bolt on a water pump, she realized she was out of penetrating oil. The small can her father had left was empty. It was a small problem, but it stopped her cold. She didn't have the money to just buy more. The hardware store on the main street seemed like the only option. Frank's Hardware and Appliance. The sign was old, the paint flaking, but the windows were clean. The bell on the door jangled. The inside smelled of metal, oil, and fresh-cut keys. It was a temple of practical things, with aisles packed to the ceiling with boxes of screws, coils of wire, and plumbing fittings. A man stood behind the counter, thick-set and bald, with a graying beard and arms like hydraulic pistons. He was arguing with an ancient cash register. "Come on, you piece of junk," he muttered, hitting a key. The drawer refused to open. "The spring in the latch mechanism is probably worn," Alara said, her voice quiet. The man looked up, startled. He hadn't seen her come in. "What?" "The cash drawer. If the spring is worn, it doesn't have enough force to pop the latch. You can try to jiggle the key as you turn it, to help it along, but you'll need to replace the spring eventually." The man, Frank, stared at her. He looked at her grease-stained hands, her practical work clothes. Then he looked back at the register. He jiggled the key as he turned it. With a reluctant ka-ching, the drawer popped open. Frank looked at the open drawer, then back at Alara, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Well, I'll be damned." He wiped a hand on his jeans and extended it over the counter. "Frank Miller." "Alara," she said, shaking his hand. His grip was like a vice. "What can I get for you, Alara?" "I need some penetrating oil, and maybe some advice." She explained what she was doing. As she spoke, Frank's expression changed. His eyes, which had been shrewd and businesslike, warmed with recognition. "You're in the old soap and spin," he said. "You're Thomas's kid." Alara nodded. It was happening again. The town was knitting her back to her father. Frank leaned on the counter, a nostalgic look on his face. "Your dad. He taught me how to rebuild a transmission when I was 17. My first car. He spent a whole weekend under that greasy Ford with me. Never asked for a thing." He shook his head. "When I opened this place, he helped me wire the whole building. Grounded me," he said, "literally." He straightened up, his demeanor all business again, but a different kind of business. "What do you need? Oil? What else?" "I need a new pump for a Speed Queen 711. The bearing's shot." Frank nodded. He walked back into the cavernous storeroom and returned a minute later with a can of oil and a heavy, new-looking water pump in a dusty box. He set them on the counter. "There you go." "How much do I owe you?" Alara asked, reaching for her small roll of cash. Frank held up a hand. Let's call it an account. For Thomas's kid. You pay me when the machines are spinning and the coins are dropping, and you pay me at cost. He paused. Better yet, I need help around here. Place is a mess. Shelves need stocking, floors need sweeping. You work for me, 10 hours a week. We'll call it an even trade for whatever parts you need. Deal? It was a lifeline. A real, tangible lifeline. Not charity. A job. A trade. An exchange of work for work. The way her father would have done it. Deal, she said, her voice thick with emotion. That was the beginning of the second alliance. Frank became her technical advisor, her parts supplier, her mentor in the arcane world of appliance repair. She would work her hours at the hardware store, organizing chaotic shelves of plumbing elbows and sorting metric from imperial bolts. In return, he would give her the parts she needed, and more importantly, the knowledge he had accumulated over 30 years. Those big front loaders, he said one afternoon, looking at her diagrams. The bearings on those are a nightmare. You'll need a gear puller, and a lot of patience. He lent her the gear puller. She supplied the patience. Word was spreading through Havenwood. It was a small town. A secret was a valuable and short-lived commodity. The girl in the old laundromat, Thomas's daughter, fixing the place up. People started to stop by. Mr. Henderson, the retired mailman, dropped off a thermos of hot coffee one morning. Your father used to fix my lawnmower, he said. He had a gift. Mrs. Gable from the bakery brought a tray of still warm cinnamon buns. Thomas built us our new bread shelves, so sturdy. The contributions were small, but they were constant. A bag of apples, a pair of work gloves, a story. Each story was a brushstroke, adding color and depth to the portrait of the father she knew and the man she was just getting to know. He hadn't just been a quiet handyman. He had been a part of the fabric of this town, a silent thread holding things together. One day, as she was scrubbing the grime off the front windows, a ginger cat hopped onto the sill. It was the same one she had seen on her first day. It watched her with intelligent green eyes, then began to meticulously wash its face, completely unbothered. She went to the diner and came back with a small saucer of milk. She set it on the ground. The cat looked at her, then at the milk, and gracefully hopped down. It drank delicately. I used to see your daddy feeding him, Martha said, coming out of the diner to collect her breakfast bag. Thomas called him Rusty, on account of his color. Rusty. The cat finished the milk, looked at Alara, and rubbed against her leg with a rumbling purr. Then it curled up in a patch of sun on the laundromat's front step, as if it owned the place. It stayed. Rusty became her shadow, a silent, warm presence in the big, echoing building. He would nap on top of a dryer as she worked, his purr a counterpoint to the clang of her tools. In the quiet moments, when the exhaustion set in and the sheer scale of the work threatened to overwhelm her, the simple act of stroking his soft fur was enough to ground her again. She had a cat. She had a job. She had allies. She had a home. The dryers were a different beast. They were huge, gas-powered behemoths, stacked too high. They were intimidating. Gas lines, ignition modules, high temperatures. The potential for error felt much more significant. The notebook was direct. Page 41. The ADC dryers. These are the lungs of the place. Treat them with respect. The main gas shutoff is the red handle in the utility closet. Turn it off before you touch anything. I mean it. She turned it off. The small hiss of the pilot lights died, and a new level of silence fell over the room. She started with the simplest problem, cleaning. The lint traps were choked with years of compacted fluff, a serious fire hazard. She spent an entire day just pulling out dense, gray mats of lint from every machine, then using a long, flexible brush and a shop vac Frank had lent her to clean out the vents. Then came the mechanical work. Tumbler belts, motor bearings, door gaskets. She worked her way through them, one by one, using the knowledge from the notebooks and the skills she was rapidly acquiring. The ignition modules were the scariest part. They were small electronic boxes that created the spark to light the gas. According to the notebook, they were a common failure point. Frank got her new ones at cost. Following the diagrams with painstaking care, she replaced 3 of them, her hands shaking slightly as she connected the small wires. The day came to test them. She had fixed all the mechanical issues. The tumblers spun freely. The doors sealed tight. She stood before the main gas valve, her hand hovering over the red handle. The notebook had one final entry for this section. "This is the part that takes courage, Ilara. To breathe fire into things. But you can't have warmth without a little flame. Trust the work you've done." She turned the handle. The hiss of gas returned. She went to the first dryer she had worked on. She put a quarter in the slot, one of the roll of quarters Martha had given her for testing. She pressed the start button. A fan kicked on. She heard the click of the gas valve opening, then a sharp snap of the igniter, followed by a soft whoomph as the burner lit. A wave of heat began to radiate from the machine. Inside, the big metal drum began to tumble. It was working. She went down the line, testing each one. One by one, they came to life. The soft roar of the burners, the rumble of the tumbling drums, the waves of clean, dry heat. The laundromat was filled with sound and warmth and motion. It felt alive. It felt like a real place. The front-loading washers were the final mountain to climb. They were bigger, more complex, and as Frank had warned, the bearings were a nightmare. To replace them, she had to practically disassemble the entire machine. It was a brutal, greasy, frustrating job. She spent 3 days on the first one. She used the gear puller Frank had lent her. She used a hammer and a block of wood. She used every curse word she knew. On the 3rd day, covered in grease and on the verge of giving up, the old bearing finally came free with a screech of tortured metal. She held it in her hand. It was pitted and scarred. She replaced it with the new, smooth, heavy one from Frank's store. Reassembling the machine was like solving a complex puzzle in reverse, but when she was done, when she turned it on and it spun up with a smooth, powerful whir instead of a grinding roar, the feeling of triumph was immense. It took another month, but she did them all. One evening, she stood in the middle of the room, wiping her hands on a rag. Every machine was fixed. The floor was clean. The walls were painted a bright, cheerful white. The folding table was steady on its feet. The windows, stripped of their plywood and scrubbed clean, let the golden light of the setting sun pour in. Martha stood in the doorway, a basket of fresh laundry in her arms. "For the first official load," she said, her voice thick with pride. Frank was there, too, leaning against a dryer, a rare smile on his face. Mr. Henderson peered in through the window, giving her a thumbs up. Ilara loaded the first machine with the towels from Martha's basket. She added the soap. She put the quarter in the slot. The room filled with the sound of whirring motors, sloshing water, and tumbling drums. It was the sound of a functioning business, the sound of a promise fulfilled. The soap and spin was open. The first few weeks were quiet. The novelty of the reopened laundromat drew in some of Martha's regulars and a few curious locals. The income was a trickle, not a flood. Enough to buy groceries, to start paying Frank back for the parts, to put a little aside for the utility bills. It was enough. Ilara found a new rhythm, a life. Mornings were for customers. She'd make coffee, offer help with the machines, keep the place spotless. She learned the names of the regulars. Sarah, a young mother with 2 toddlers, who created a mountain of laundry every week. Old Man Hemlock, a retired farmer who only washed 1 load of denim overalls every Tuesday. She installed a bulletin board and people started putting up notices. A lost cat, a bake sale at the church, a room for rent. The laundromat was becoming what her father had intended, not just a place to wash clothes, but a center for the community, a place to connect. Afternoons were for her own projects. The notebooks contained more than just repair guides. There were sketches, designs for sturdy wooden benches for the front of the store, plans for a small, free library in the corner, a recipe for a powerful, all-natural stain remover. Her father's vision for the place went beyond just fixing the machines. It was about building a space of welcome and utility. She started building the benches, using lumber Frank sold her at a steep discount. Her carpentry skills, learned at her father's side as a child, came back to her. The feel of the wood, the smell of the sawdust, the satisfaction of a tight joint. It was another way of speaking her father's language. The quiet peace of this new life was shattered on a Tuesday. A sleek, black sedan, the kind of car that looked alien on the quiet streets of Havenwood, pulled up in front of the laundromat. The sun glinted off its polished hood. Alara's stomach went cold. She knew that car. Her Uncle Marcus got out. He was dressed in another expensive suit, a dark gray that seemed to absorb the light. He looked thinner, angrier. There were new lines of stress around his eyes. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, taking in the scene. The clean windows, the new benches, the cheerful, hand-painted open sign she had hung in the window, the trickle of customers coming and going. He saw not a community hub, but a functioning business, a revenue stream. He walked in. The bell on the door, which usually sounded so cheerful, now sounded like an alarm. Liam was with him, trailing a few steps behind like a reluctant ghost. He looked even worse than his father. His suit was rumpled, his face pale. He wouldn't look at her. "Well, well," Marcus said, his voice oozing a familiar, false charm. He ran a finger along the top of a gleaming white washer. "You've been busy." Alara said nothing. She stood behind the small counter she had built near the back, a rag in her hand. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, but her hands were steady. She was not the same girl he had dismissed in that bone-colored office. "I have to admit, I'm impressed," Marcus continued, circling the room. "You took this pile of junk and you actually made something of it." Sarah, the young mother, quickly gathered her kids and her laundry basket and scurried out, sensing the tension in the air. "What do you want, Marcus?" Alara's voice was low and even. Marcus stopped his circling and faced her. The mask of charm dropped. His face was hard and covetous. "I think there's been a misunderstanding, a grave error in the administration of your father's estate." "There was no error," Alara said. "You sold me the deed. I have the paperwork. It's legal." "Paperwork can be contested," he sneered. "A grieving, vulnerable young woman, coerced into a deal, a property grossly undervalued, a clear case of well, in this case, youth abuse. A good lawyer could have a field day with it. I could have this entire transfer nullified. This place," he gestured around the room, "reverts to the estate." "My estate." Liam flinched, a visible, painful motion. "Dad, don't." "Stay out of this, Liam," Marcus snapped without looking at him. This was his plan. He had waited. He had let her do all the work, invest her time, her sweat, her soul. He had let her take the risk, and now that it was a success, he was here to snatch it away. The old Alara would have crumpled. The old Alara would have believed him, would have been terrified by his legal threats, his confidence, his sheer, brutal greed. But the old Alara was gone. She had been scoured away with the grime, burned off with the sweat, replaced by someone who knew how to rebuild a motor and stand her ground. "You won't get it," she said calmly. Marcus laughed. "Oh, I will. You have nothing. You are nothing. Just like your father. A tinkerer, playing with scraps. I build empires. You wash socks. We are not in the same league." "My father left me more than you could ever understand," Alara said. She reached under her counter and brought out the first notebook. She opened it to the first page and laid it flat. "For Alara. If you're reading this, it means Marcus was as predictable as a stripped gear." She looked up at him. "He knew you'd come." She then pulled out a folded piece of paper from the back of the notebook. It was an old carbon copy of a legal document, a quitclaim deed, dated 6 years ago. "He knew you'd try to take everything," she said, her voice ringing with a newfound power. "So he took precautions. The deed you transferred to me was for the building. But the business, the name, the assets, the machines, he transferred those into a trust for me years ago. This laundromat was legally mine long before he died. The $12 you took from me was for an empty brick shell, which I have since filled with my own assets." She had found the document tucked into the last page of the third notebook in an envelope marked insurance. Her father had thought of everything. He knew his brother's greed was a force of nature, and he had built a seawall against it. Marcus stared at the document, then at her. The color drained from his face. The sneer, the confidence, it all evaporated, leaving behind the pinched, desperate man she had seen glimpses of. He was cornered. He was beaten. This is fraud," he sputtered. But the words had no conviction. "No," a new voice said from the doorway. "Frank." He stood there, his arms crossed, a heavy wrench hanging from a loop on his belt. Martha was beside him, holding a phone as if she were about to make a call. "It's called foresight. Now, I think you and your boy should leave. This is a place of business, and you're not welcome." Marcus looked from Frank's stony face to Martha's determined one. He looked at the customers who had gathered on the sidewalk, watching. He looked at Liam, who was staring at the floor, the picture of defeat. He was beaten, and he knew it. Without another word, he turned and stalked out of the laundromat. A man who had built an empire, undone by a quiet mechanic's love for his daughter, and a piece of paper in a dusty notebook. Liam didn't follow him immediately. He stood there for a moment, lost. He finally looked at Alara, his eyes filled with a wretched mix of shame and despair. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The words were barely audible over the hum of the machines. "For everything." Then he turned and walked out, getting into the black sedan. He didn't look back. Alara watched them drive away until the car was just a black speck disappearing down the road. She took a long, shuddering breath. The rag was still clenched in her hand. She slowly, deliberately, uncurled her fingers. The laundromat held. She had held. Life settled back into its rhythm, but it was a new rhythm, a stronger one. The confrontation with Marcus hadn't broken her. It had tempered her. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet, solid certainty. This place was hers. She had earned it not just with her hands, but with her heart. A month went by. The autumn air grew crisp. The trees lining Havenwood's main street began to turn fiery shades of orange and red. The laundromat was doing well. It was clean and bright and busy. One afternoon, a rickety, beat-up pickup truck she didn't recognize pulled up. A young man got out. He was thin. His clothes were worn, and he moved with a hesitation that spoke of deep weariness. It was Liam. He looked completely different. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by jeans and a flannel shirt. The city softness was gone, replaced by a gaunt, haunted look. He stood by his truck for a long moment, as if gathering the courage to approach. Alara was sweeping the front walk. She stopped, leaning on the broom, and just watched him. She felt no anger, only a kind of weary sadness. He finally walked over, not meeting her eyes. He looked at the benches she had built. They were now painted a cheerful blue. "Those are nice," he said, his voice rough. "I like them," she replied. An awkward silence stretched between them, filled only by the whisper of the wind in the turning leaves. "He lost everything," Liam said suddenly, his voice cracking. "My dad. He made some bad investments. He was leveraged to the hilt. He was counting on this place, to save him. When that fell through, It all came down like a house of cards. Alara said nothing. She just listened. He's gone. I don't know where. Just left a note. The car, the house, all of it. Gone. I've been living in this truck. He finally looked at her. The shame in his eyes was a raw, open thing. I deserve it. I know I do. I stood by and I let him. I was weak. I was a coward. He took a shaky breath. I'm not here to ask for anything. I had to say I was sorry. Properly. And I wanted to. He trailed off, gesturing vaguely. I don't know. I need to do something. Something that isn't about taking. Alara looked at him. The lost, privileged boy from the lawyer's office was gone. In his place was a man who had been stripped bare, just as she had been. He was at his own ground zero. She looked over at the side of the building. There was a small, weed-choked patch of dirt where she had planned to plant a small garden next spring. There were a few rotting railroad ties lying there that the previous owner had left behind. I need a retaining wall built, she said, her voice practical, devoid of pity. To hold a flower bed. I have the materials. I don't have the time. Liam looked at the patch of dirt, then back at her, confused. I don't know how to do that. I can show you, she said. It's hard work. Your back will hurt, but it's good work. He stared at her for a long time, his expression unreadable. Then he gave a slow, hesitant nod. Okay. For the next week, they worked. Alara showed him how to level the ground, how to lay the first course of timbers, how to drill the holes and hammer in the rebar to hold them in place. She didn't coddle him. She corrected his mistakes. She made him do it again when it wasn't right. He was clumsy at first. His hands, accustomed to keyboards and steering wheels, were soft and easily blistered. But he didn't complain. He worked with a grim, quiet determination. He learned. They didn't talk much. They just worked. The shared physical labor became their language. The scrape of the shovel, the thud of the hammer, the groan of tired muscles. At the end of the week, a low, sturdy retaining wall bordered the patch of dirt. It was simple, but it was solid. It was straight and true. Liam stood back, looking at it, his hands on his hips. He was covered in dirt, his face streaked with sweat. But for the first time, the haunted look was gone from his eyes. It was replaced by the simple, profound satisfaction of having made something with his own hands. It's good, he said, almost to himself. Yes, Alara said. It is. He turned to her. Thank you. It was for more than just the chance to work. Go find your own place to build, Liam, she said quietly. Start with something small. He nodded. He understood. He got into his old truck, and this time, when he drove away, it didn't feel like an escape. It felt like a beginning. The act of atonement was complete. Not forgiveness, not forgetting. Just a balancing. A small act of creation to counter a large act of destruction. With the last of the major projects done and the business humming along, a new kind of quiet settled over Alara's life. She had time to think, to breathe. She found herself returning to the notebooks not for instructions, but for the connection to her father. She read the entries over and over, the ones tucked between wiring diagrams and lubrication schedules. On washer 2, remember that time you tried to fix the toaster with a fork? You were 6. You blew the power to the whole block. You weren't scared, though. Just curious about the spark. Never lose that. On dryer 6, some things just need heat and time. Don't rush them. They were his way of talking to her, of continuing to be her father even after he was gone. But she felt there was still something missing. A final word. A deeper truth. She picked up the 3rd notebook, the one where she had found the trust document. She had read it cover to cover, or so she thought. But now she went through it again, page by page, her senses on high alert. In the very back, the leather cover was thicker than in the front. She ran her fingers over it. There was a slight bulge. a faint line she had never noticed before. Using a small, sharp knife from her father's toolbox, she carefully sliced along the seam. The leather parted, revealing a hidden pocket. Inside was a single sealed envelope. It was yellowed with age. On the front, in his familiar script, it just said, Ilara. Her hands trembled as she opened it. This was it. The final secret. The deepest one. The letter inside was written on thin, almost translucent paper. The ink was faded. My dearest Ilara, if you are reading this, you have my tools, my notebooks, and my laundromat. But there is one more thing I need to give you. The truth. I know you have always wondered about your mother. I told you she left because she couldn't handle this small life. That was a lie. A lie I told to protect you, and maybe to protect myself. The truth is, she was sick. Not in her body, but in her mind. A sadness that was like a deep, dark well she couldn't climb out of. The doctors had names for it, pills for it, but nothing ever really touched it. She loved you, Ilara. She loved you so much it hurt her. She would look at you and cry, because she felt she was a shadow darkening your life. One day, she told me she had to leave, not because she didn't love us, but because she did. She thought her absence would be a better gift to you than her presence. She made me promise not to tell you. She wanted your memory of her to be simple, not complicated by a sickness you couldn't understand. I didn't fight her. That is my great regret. I was a fixer of things, of machines. I didn't know how to fix a person. I let her go. My brother Marcus knew. He found out. He used it against me. He told our parents, and they saw her sickness as my failure. That was when they cut me off, when he took my share of the inheritance. He said I had shamed the family. I didn't fight that either. I was too broken. I just wanted to raise you in peace. This laundromat, it was my answer to all of that, to Marcus's greed, to my own failure. I wanted to build something clean and honest and useful, something that served people, something that couldn't be taken away. I wanted to build it for you, to prove to you that you can build a whole world out of nothing but your own 2 hands and a good heart, to give you a place to stand that was entirely your own. Your mother's name was Anna. She had a sister in Oregon. Her name is Carol. I have enclosed her address. I don't know what you will do with this information. That is up to you. You are the master of your own life now, but you deserve to know that you were not abandoned. You were loved, fiercely. Be good. Be strong. Be useful. Love, Dad. Ilara read the letter once, twice, a third time. The laundromat with its humming machines and the warm afternoon sun faded away. Her whole life she had carried the story of her mother's abandonment like a stone inside her. It was a simple, painful story. She was not enough. Her father was not enough. This life was not enough. Now that story was gone, replaced by something infinitely more complex, more tragic, and more human. It wasn't a story of abandonment. It was a story of a desperate, broken love, a story of sacrifice. The anger she had held for a woman she barely remembered dissolved, replaced by a profound, aching sorrow. The quiet resentment she had sometimes felt toward her father for his own silence on the matter was replaced by a deep understanding of his pain, his regret, his fierce, protective love. It all clicked into place. His quietness, his focus on his work, his need to build something solid and real. He was building a fortress for her against a world that had taken so much from them both. She sat there for a long time, the letter in her hand, as the sun went down and the machines finished their cycles, one by one, falling silent. Rusty the cat jumped into her lap and purred, a warm, vibrating anchor in the sea of her emotions. The revelation didn't erase the pain of the past. It recontextualized it. It gave it shape and meaning. It was the final, crucial part she needed to fix, not a machine, but herself. A few days later, she sat at the small desk she had built in the back office. The address for her aunt, Carol, was written on a piece of paper in front of her. For a long time, she just looked at it. What would she even say? What did she want? An explanation? A connection? A family? She realized she didn't want anything from them. The need for a family to claim her had faded. She had a family, a found family, forged in kindness and shared work. She had Martha and Frank and the memory of her father. But the story was no longer just hers. It belonged to her mother's memory, too. She took out a clean sheet of paper and began to write. "Dear Carol, you don't know me. My name is Alara. I am Anna's daughter. My father, Thomas, recently passed away, and he left me a letter. He told me about my mother. He told me she was sick, and that she left because she loved me. For 20 years, I believed she had abandoned me. I don't believe that anymore. I'm not writing to ask for anything. I don't need anything. I am well. I live in Havenwood, in a place my father built for me. It's a laundromat. It's clean and warm, and it's mine. I just wanted you to know that I know the truth, and that I am not angry. I am sad for the life she didn't get to live, but I am not angry at her. And I wanted to know if you have a picture of her. I don't have one. Sincerely, Alara." She folded the letter, put it in an envelope, and addressed it. Walking to the small post office down the street felt like a pilgrimage. Dropping it in the mailbox was an act of letting go. It didn't matter if Carol wrote back. It didn't matter if she ever got a picture. She had taken control of her own story. She had spoken the truth into the void, and that was enough. The first snow of the season fell a week before Christmas. It was a gentle, quiet snow, the kind that blankets the world in silence. Alara stood at the big front window of the Soap and Spin, watching the flakes drift down and melt on the warm glass. The laundromat was decorated for the holidays. A small, fragrant pine tree stood in the corner, adorned with ornaments made from old machine parts, gears spray-painted silver, belts twisted into stars. Martha had strung popcorn and cranberries. Frank had wired tiny LED lights to it. The place was warm and bright. Every machine was running, a chorus of humming and sloshing. The room smelled of clean laundry, hot coffee, and pine. Customers came and went, stamping snow from their boots, their arms full of clothes, their faces ruddy from the cold. They wished her a Merry Christmas. She had finished the final project from her father's notebooks, a small, sturdy bookshelf in the corner, filled with donated paperbacks. "The Havenwood Lending Library," the sign read. It was already popular. The flower bed Liam had helped her build was sleeping under a blanket of snow, waiting for spring. She had heard from Frank that Liam had gotten a job with a construction crew in the next county over, starting small. A letter had arrived from Oregon. It was from Carol. Inside was a short, kind note, and a photograph. It was a picture of a young woman with Alara's eyes and a sad, beautiful smile, holding a baby wrapped in a yellow blanket. Anna, her mother. Alara had framed it and put it on her desk in the back office, next to the picture of her and her dad at the county fair. Her family, finally whole. She took a final tour of the room, her hand trailing along the warm tops of the dryers. The walls were a clean, bright white. The floor was spotless. The benches she had built were smooth and sturdy. The machines, her machines, ran with a steady, reliable rhythm. This was not just a laundromat. It was a testament. It was proof that a thing isn't ruined just because it's dirty, or broken, or forgotten. It was proof that value wasn't something you took, but something you built, with your hands, with your heart. She had fulfilled her father's legacy. She had found her purpose. She had built her home. She sat down on one of the benches by the window, a mug of hot chocolate warming her hands. Rusty, now a fat and happy laundromat cat, hopped up beside her and leaned against her, his purr a rumbling engine of contentment. Outside, The snow fell harder, covering the town in a clean, white sheet. Inside, the lights were on, the machines were running, and the air was warm. A young woman, not much older than Elira had been when she first arrived, came in, shivering, a thin laundry bag in her hand. Her eyes were tired, her face etched with worry. Elira watched as she struggled to figure out the machines. Elira got up. She walked over. "Here," she said, her voice gentle. "Let me show you how it works." She was continuing the legacy, the quiet work of helping, of fixing, of making a warm, clean place in a cold world. The last machine was running. The door was open.